39. Job 39. God's still speaking out of the whirlwind. Got a lot I want to say today. And talk a little bit about chapter 38 to get started here, but we got to remember that Job chapter 1 to chapter 37, Job and his three friends and his wife and Elihu are the ones that have been talking, and they all been talking, and they all been questioning, and they all been arguing. But in Job chapter 38 and 39, the Lord in these two chapters breaks his silence. He don't come in and say, all right, I got the 232 questions that's been asked, let me go to answering them. That's not what he does. He doesn't answer the why questions. Instead, he reveals who he is. He didn't answer all the questions. He revealed who he was, which answers the questions. But he does this in chapter 38 and chapter 39 in a surprising way. And what he does is he takes Job on a tour of creation, the weather, the stars, and then the animal kingdom. Chapter 39 is all about the animals. Job has complained and Job has questions, and Job has even hinted that if God would just come down here so we could talk, I think I could make my case. Chapter 38, God shows up and he says, gird up thy loins like a man. God shows up and Job's like, I messed up. And we talked last Sunday, we covered chapter 38, and we realized that Job, it didn't take Job long. Actually, the first question, Job realized he was in trouble. The first question was about who was there when I laid the foundation of the earth. Job's like, I'm out. I'm done. My bad. God even uses his sense of humor to, when he asked Job a question, Job ain't got an answer. He said, answer thou me. Answerest. He's saying, hey, come on, man. You had all the questions. Where's the answers at? Come on. Job ain't got no answers. We don't have any answers. Just in case you were wondering if you could answer them, we can't answer any of these questions. Because the purpose is to show how great our God is and how much we need Him. That's the purpose. Chapter 39, God's going to take a look at some animals that maybe you don't know, maybe you can't control, but God says, I can. This whole chapter presses one truth into us. One truth. And that is that He is God and we're not. That is that He is sovereign and wise and good, and we don't understand and we can't figure it out. Okay? That's what He's telling us. Let's look at chapter 39. We'll see how far we get today. By the way, if I've not already said it, I love chapter 38 through 42. Especially, it brings out the inner child in me. What do children love to do? They like to watch animal shows. Yeah. They like to go to the zoo. We like to talk about dinosaurs. Yeah, we're going to talk about dinosaurs. Maybe not today, but maybe next Sunday. I don't know. We love animals. Chapter 38 and 39 and 40 and 41, we talk about animals. We talk about how it works. I love it. Let's look at chapter 39, verse 1. Knowest thou the time when the wild goats of the rock bring forth? The rock mentioned in there is the mountains. So these are mountain goats. Or canst thou mark when the hinds do calve? Hinds were very small deer. They still have hinds now, but it's like the deer that we have, but they're really small. That the hinds do calve. Canst thou number the months that they fulfill? Or knowest thou the time when they bring forth? They bow themselves, they bring forth their young ones, they cast out their sorrows, their young ones are in good liking. They grow up with corn, they go forth, and they return not unto them. God, the first thing that God mentions here is the wild mountain goats and the deer. These mountain goats and deer lived in the mountains, in the places that people could not live. There's lots of passages that mention hinds in the Bible, and any of them that mention hinds are talking about places that we can't survive. The top of the mountains, the rocky places, the harsh places. In verse 1 and 2, those wild mountain goats and deer lived in these places. Men rarely went. In Job's day, there wasn't a camera, there wasn't biologists, there wasn't documentaries, there wasn't YouTube. Job saw an animal. He might have been told what it was. There wasn't a book. You know, we got a science teacher in here. We open up a book and we say, this is what this is, this is what this is. Job didn't have a book. God is speaking to Job, remember, out of a whirlwind about these animals that live in places that people don't live. Now, if you ask me, if you look at verse number 2, at the end of verse 1, or canst thou mark when the hinds calve? When do they have their babies? The number of the months they fulfill. What's their gestation cycle? No. Do you know when they're going to have their babies? Do you know how long that they're going to stay on their mother? How long it takes them to mature? When is it that they leave their mother to go out on their own? Job didn't have the textbook. God is asking him questions, and Job's like, I have no idea how long it takes a mountain goat from the time they get pregnant to the time that they have their baby. Got no idea. God's asking him questions. Job didn't know the gestation period. He didn't know birthing habits. He didn't know none of that. God did. God ordained it. God said that we got pigs, they're going to carry for 3 months, 3 weeks, and 3 days. We got cows, they're going to carry about a certain amount of time. We got, he says this animal is going to carry this long. That's what God does. Job didn't know. Verse 3 and 4, God says, let's see, he says there, they bow themselves and bring forth their young ones. They cast out their sorrows. Their young ones are in the good liking. They grow up with their corn. They go forth, return not unto them. God is the Lord of what you don't see and what you don't understand. Wild goats of the rock. Job, you don't know when they conceive, how long they carry, when they bring forth, how long they stay young, when they go off on your own. I got this, Job. You don't know, but I do. Why? Because I spoke it into existence. I'm going to tell you something. We have a God that ordained everything. There is not a detail that God didn't say this is how it's going to be. These wild goats, these hinds, there's things like this in your life that you never notice. Places you've never been or you'll never go, processes you'll never think about, but God managed it perfectly. He ordained it perfectly, and we don't even think about it and don't realize it until we do, and then we're like, man, God, He's got this all figured out, don't He? And then we'll turn around and worry about if God is going to take care of us. And He's taking care of the wild mountain goats. Is He not going to take care of us? God reaches these hidden places, these places that men can't even be. And if He oversees the birth of the wild goats, He's not going to forget about you. You may feel like that you live on the backside of a rocky cliff, which is where these goats live. You may feel like Moses, if you'll remember, when God spoke to him out of the burning bush the first time, said he was on the backside of the desert. The desert is pretty barren, but he is on the backside of the desert. Moses is back there pouting. Don't know what to do. God visited him there. You may feel overlooked or unnoticed, but God, our God, counts the months of a mountain goat's pregnancy. Yeah. You think he's not going to care about you and take care of you? Our God is amazing. Our God is wonderful. Job chapter 38 through Job chapter 41 gives us a couple of things. Number one, how big he is, how small we are. But number two, how much does he care about us? More than we can comprehend. Let's look at verse number 5. Who hath sent out the wild ass free? Who hath loosed the bands of the wild ass? Whose house I have made the wilderness, and the barren land his dwellings. He scorneth the multitude of the city, neither regardeth he the crying of the driver. The range of the mountains is his pasture, and he searcheth after every green thing. This is the wild ass is the wild donkey. This is God of the untamed animal. This is freedom. Verse 5 through 8, the scripture, it talks about this donkey. It's a picture of something that we can't tame. It wants nothing to do with cities. It wants nothing to do with yokes. It wants nothing to do with masters. God said, I made him that way. I gave him the wilderness. I gave him the plains. I gave him the land as his home. I supply his food. I take care of him. You can't control him. I created him. Yeah, that's what I did. See, what we need to take away from this is that the world is bigger than our little city, our little environment, right? The little world that we live in. Job's world was pretty big. Job's world was a little bigger than our world, right? He had his own little empire, we called it, where he had servants that had servants, and he had enough animals. He had a great empire. He needed to have trade. He was the richest man in the world. Job was a pretty big deal. But God reminds him, Job, there's a whole wild world outside of your little world. My plans are bigger than your small little section. You should trust me, Job. I got this. That's what he's saying. There's another truth in this that we need to understand. Not everything in this world exists for us. This animal here that they're talking about has no practical use for Job. Job can't tame it. These things are wild. You can't do nothing with them. We think that tame donkeys are hard to deal with. These right here really are hard to deal with. God made him. God takes care of him. He gives him a home, but he has no use for us. God's plans are beyond our understanding. It's kind of like when you get stung by a wasp and you say, why in the world do we have wasps? They ain't doing nothing for me but hurting me. God has a design and a plan for everything. We may not see it, may not matter to us. We gotta resist this view of creation and church life. Some things and some people and some ministries exist simply for God's pleasure and God's glory. Some suffering that we endure is for God's glory. The blind man, John chapter 9, disciples say, who sinned? Was it his parents or was it him? And God said neither his parents nor him, but so that God may be glorified. This man was blind from his birth so that God could receive glory on his behalf. Sometimes your suffering may be for the glory of God. What about that? Job didn't see it that way. God's trying to show him that. Romans 11:36 says, "For of him, and through him, and to him are all things." Everything is for the Lord. May not be for our pleasure, it's for the Lord's pleasure. We shouldn't get any glory, he should get all the glory. Let's look at verse 9. This is where we're going to get some interesting looks out of some folk. If you got a King James Bible, you'll see some terminology in here that may make you raise an eyebrow. 39 verse 9. "Will the unicorn be willing to serve thee, or abide by thy crib? Canst thou bind the unicorn with his band in the furrow? Or will he harrow the valleys after thee? Wilt thou trust him, because his strength is great? Or wilt thou leave thy labor to him? Wilt thou believe him, that he will bring home thy seed and gather it in the barn?" Unicorns. Many modern Bibles and commentaries replace unicorn with wild ox here. And I'm going to step out of preacher and I'm going to step into Sunday school teacher. We're going to have a little lesson here. I'm going to teach you a little bit. I want to take a minute and deal with the importance of the King James Scripture and the words, the way it's used, because we take things and change them around. A lot of the modern translations will do that, and it changes the meaning and the purpose. Wild ox. So an ox is it's cattle that are used to work. Okay, a lot of the modern translations change unicorn to wild ox, and I'm going to tell you why I don't believe it's that in a minute. So what does the Bible actually say about the unicorn? Well, a unicorn is mentioned 7 times in the Bible. Some characteristics we see. He has great strength and is untamable. Numbers 23, verse 22, God brought them out of Egypt. He hath, as it were, the strength of a unicorn. Numbers 24:8, same phrase, the strength of a unicorn. Obviously, this unicorn is mighty strong. Job 39, 9 through 12 describes the unicorn, says it will not serve, it will not abide in the crib. This is a corn crib where they store grain. It'll not plow your fields, can't be trusted to bring home your harvest. This is a powerful animal that's not domesticated and it's wild. Can't be tamed. Can't be tamed. None. Another thing that's mentioned in Scripture is that it can move with agility. Psalms 29:6 says, He maketh them also to skip like a calf, Lebanon and Syrian like a young unicorn. Now, if you've ever had cows and you see calves out in the pasture, sometimes they'll get kind of silly and they'll jump and bounce around and skip around and run and do all that kind of stuff. But most of the time, the only time you see big bulls doing that, like the wild ox that they're referencing, is what we see today in professional bull riding. Not many cows run and jump and skip. Unicorn is strong and capable, not sluggish, very agile. The third thing that I want to mention to you about the unicorn mentioned in the Bible is that it's associated with a single horn. So it's just got one horn on it. Psalms 92:10 says, But my horn shalt thou exalt like the horn of a unicorn. Here, the horn of the unicorn, singular, makes people think of like a one-horned animal. This is one of the key texts that suggests that it's a singular horn. So before y'all argue in your minds with me about what animal we're talking about here, biblically speaking, it's very strong, it's untamable for farm work, it moves with the agility, and it's got one noticeable horn. the unicorn. Nowhere in the Bible does it say it's a white horse with a rainbow horn coming out of his head, by the way. That's not in there. We'll get to that in a minute. Problems with the wild ox explanation. So, my Bible, which is a Thompson Chain Reference Study Bible, I love Thompson Chain Reference Study Bibles. If you're a Bible studier, which we all should be, the Thompson Chain Reference has more reference points than any other Bible I've ever read, and any Bible that I've ever researched to have. So, for example, if you find a verse and that verse has a theme or a key word, it'll give you a reference point, and there's a library in the back of the Bible that will give you all the different places that verse is used. Great reference tool, study tool. But even this Bible here refers to it as a wild ox in its references. The biblical description goes beyond an ordinary ox. A wild ox is strong, but Job 39, this creature is especially untamable. Oxen were tamed to work. Will the unicorn be willing to serve thee? Wilt thou trust him because his strength is great? The picture of the animal that's being described here is something that's different than an oxen. Oxen were trained for the yoke. They put a yoke over their neck, right? And they would put two of them together. One would pull, put two of them, they'd pull. Couldn't put a yoke on it. Wouldn't happen. Wouldn't be domesticated. In Psalms 92:10, like I mentioned, the horn of a unicorn, singular horn. Most oxen that I see, they have a horn coming out of both sides of their head. Now, there are some that don't develop one on one side and they have them on the other, but typically they have two horns. This is a distinctively single horn animal. But, like I said, saying that the unicorn is a horse that's fairy tale like with a horn coming out of his head, that's not in the Bible. I have nothing to say about that. When people hear unicorn today, if I mention unicorn, whether we're in here or we're in the young kids classroom or my youth class, it don't matter. What are people going to automatically think of? The white horse with a horn coming out of his head, because we watched, what was it called? My Little Pony? My Little Pony. Does that one have unicorns? There's one of them that had unicorns.
Rainbow Bright rode a unicorn.
Whatever.
A lot of stuff.
Unicorns. That's what they are.
Glitter.
So to give you a little bit of history on this, a unicorn comes from Greek mythology. And it's just been modernized now that is what we consider a unicorn. 21st century imagery of the unicorn, we're trying to apply it to a 17th century word and a 3,000-year-old Hebrew text. It don't go together, okay? So historically, if we look at the English usage, and you get you an old Webster's dictionary, don't get a modern one, because a modern one has been changed. It's no good. You need something before 1955, really, if you want to get the truth. But if you look back at a Noah Webster's 1828 dictionary, which is the first edition, unicorn is defined as an animal with one horn, the monoceros, which is what we refer to as a rhinoceros. Notice that there's no mention of a horse-like fantasy creature. Don't say nothing about that. No reference to mythical beings. It explicitly says that the name is often applied to the rhinoceros. Now, same dictionary, if you go to rhinoceros, it says a genus of the quadrupeds of two species, one of which the unicorn that has a single horn growing almost directly from the nose. There is another species with two horns, the bicornis. They are natives of Asia and Africa. So in Webster's day, 1828, the one-horned rhinoceros was a unicorn, and the two-horn was a bicornis. So why are we having a science lesson Sunday morning? Well, it's important that we understand our Bible so that we can apply it properly. So, implications from reading the Bible. King James Version is translated 1611. Webster wrote in 1828, 200 years later, but he still understood the unicorn as something that was real, and it was a one-horned animal, rhinoceros. If the meaning of unicorn shifted in the last 200 years from rhinoceros, which is a one-horned beast, to a mythical horse with a horn, then we can't logically apply the horse with a horn that's white and fairy tale like to what the Bible's talking about here. That's not what the Bible's talking about. So I get a lot of questions from kids, usually at school, that they say, unicorns in the Bible, ain't it? I didn't know unicorns were real. And I'm like, the one you're talking about is not. White horse, rainbow horn on its head, whatever, that's not what we're talking about. So when the King James translators wrote unicorn, they were not thinking about a fairy tale horse, okay? And I don't believe that they were referring to a wild ox. They were referring to a one-horned beast, much like a rhinoceros. I think that's what they were talking about. And I'll even go a little further and let y'all, some of y'all that think I'm crazy, give you a little more ammunition to use against me. Might have been talking about a dinosaur type creature. You'll find out if you'll take some time. You don't have to raise your hands here, but if you've read on and you've read 39 through 41, you'll find out we're about to talk about some animals. The unicorn, the behemoth, and the leviathan. 3 creatures mentioned in Job that are some major animals that we don't have today. That Job obviously knew about and had in his day. Job, by the way, is post-flood, but very close to the flood, because it mentions, I don't have my note right here, but in around chapter 30, he mentions the gray-bearded men after the great flood. Talks about, so there's people that remember the flood, generationally. So we're talking about close to the flood generation. Anyway, so that's the timeline we're at. But I don't think it'd be crazy to think about that this single horn animal could be a single horn dinosaur. Reasons you might want to believe this is there was a lot of dinosaurs that had one horn. In what we have in our imagery today. We do have the fossils. I can't tell you what color it was, if it had feathers or scales or anything like that, because we never, I don't know about all that stuff, but I do know that we have bone structures and there's ones that have one horn. What I do know is the Bible treats the unicorn as a real creature. And I take my Bible as it's written. Look at the flow. Chapter 38 ends with talking about a lion. And then it talks about the raven. And then we talked about goats. And then we talked about hinds. And then we talked about wild donkeys. And then we talked about a unicorn. Why would we have a mythical creature that's not real in line with all these real creatures? That's because it was a real creature. And after this, that obviously we're not going to get to today, we talk about peacocks, and we talk about ostriches, and we talk about eagles, and we talk about war horses. We talk about all kinds. These are all real things that we're talking about. Job is talking about real animals. God is speaking to him about real animals that he knew about. He knew about these animals. Probably seen them. Why would God talk to Job about something that Job hasn't seen? I mean, other than like the foundation of the earth stuff, but he's talking about real stuff. We're talking about the animal kingdom here. Chapter 38 through chapter 41. If you want me to understand something that you're telling me, you need me to be able to relate to it or understand. So you say, hey, you know this person, or you remember this time, we were there together, we saw this, do this. You can't expect me to understand what you're saying if I have no idea what you're talking about. But Job knew about these animals, and that's why God's talking to him about it. He's not going to talk to Job about something that an animal that Job has never experienced. Yeah, we started out with the foundation of the earth and the stars and the ocean and all that stuff, and Job didn't know about it, but he knew about these things. So it's real. Chapter 39, chapter 40, chapter 41, you're going to find yourself in some, if you've never read that, you've never studied it, you're going to be reading it thinking, what in the world are we talking about here? But it's real animals, real creatures. The Bible puts unicorn in there with the rest of the animals that are real. He talked about that you couldn't tame him for plowing, that he skipped, that he was really strong. These are things that Job could see and could understand. Scripture does not care about it being horse-like, or it would have said a horse with a horn, I think, But anyway, there's nothing in here that talks about a horse. It does talk about a war horse later in this chapter. The biblical focus here is one horn, great strength, untamable, and it's agile. So I don't want to, I'm not going to get in an argument about it, but I will say that I think that this is a very, very large, strong, powerful animal that nobody could tame, that had one horn, that was obviously pretty agile, that would be something that they look at and they said, man, boy, if we could tame that, we could get a lot of work done, but we can't. It's untamable. This is an animal of tremendous strength and a horn that's probably scary. Men couldn't domesticate it. Job is hearing about this animal, and he's like, no, you're right, God. We see them and we stay away from them. So God made it. God governed it. God understands it. We can't do anything with it. And what God's trying to get Job to see is if you cannot manage to tame this one beast, how do you think you can manage me or run my universe? Job, you've asked me all these questions. You can't answer any of mine. God possesses powers that we cannot even comprehend. There's unicorns in our lives, however you want to apply it. Events, forces, things going on in life, disease, disruption, things that we can't control. God created it. He's in control of it. We have to understand that we can't manage everything. You can't manage everything. But if you have that relationship with the Lord, you know that He's managing. So all we got to do is just trust and go on. Now that's the hard part, right? Trusting and going on. It's hard to say, Lord, I don't understand why these things are going on, but I trust that it's happening for a reason. All things work together for good, for we know all things work together for good. So Lord, I trust that this is good, and I'm going to praise you in this time of suffering. It's a hard place to get to. But that's what He wants from us. Why does God spend a whole chapter walking Job through the animal kingdom? Because Job has been trying to sit in the judge's seat and put God in the witness box. You know, that's what the lawyers and the judges do. They ask questions. The witness answers them. Job's like, remember he starts out good. He's pointing back to God at everything, and then he starts trying to justify himself. Then he starts asking God questions that are not about what's going on in here. He thinks he's being treated unfair. So God reverses it, says, Job, you're going to sit in the witness box, and I'm going to ask you some questions. He's not being cruel. He's bringing Job back to reality. You're small, I'm great. And Job has to say, yes, sir. You're limited, I'm infinite. Yes, sir, to that too. You're wrong. I'm pure, perfect, and always true. Job has to say, yes, sir. Romans 1:20 says, the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by things that are made, so that they are without excuse. When you see that the secret birth of a wild goat or the hind, the Roman freedom of these donkeys, this untamable strength of the unicorn, you don't have to understand it. You don't have to be able to explain it. You just have to say, what a God we serve. And then you can say, what a God we serve that created these things, that designed all these things, that loves us enough that he wants a relationship. That he stands every day wanting to hear from us. Why does it, why do we think that? Well, God said, or Jesus said that that's his purpose. He intercedes for us. That's his purpose. If that's his purpose, that means that he is waiting for you to speak to him every day on every topic, on every problem, on every burden, good or bad. God wants to hear from you. If you got something on your heart this morning, I encourage you to come pray. Carly, will you play something, please?